Hello, I'm Doug Benedict, and welcome to the Butler Esports interview series, where we're interviewing sports leaders, owners, and industry experts in the evolving world of esports. Today's interview is with one of Butler's own, Associate Professor and Academic Coordinator of the Esports program, Dr. Ryan Rogers. Dr. Rogers received his bachelor's from the University of Notre Dame in Film, Television, and Theater, his master's in Media Studies from Syracuse University, and his doctorate in Mass Communication from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Rogers is the editor of Understanding Esports, an Introduction to the Global Phenomenon, and author of How Video Games Impact Players, the Pitfalls and Benefits of a Gaming Society. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, getting right into it, how did you get started professionally?
So when I graduated from Notre Dame, I interned with the Indianapolis Colts doing media content, in-game programming, coaches shows, a lot of in-house stuff, and then sort of in-game entertainment stuff, and some preseason game day stuff. That internship turned into an opportunity with Fox Sports out in Los Angeles, the national network, not a regional Fox Sports, but the Fox Sports we know from Fox NFL Sunday and MLB on Fox and NASCAR on Fox, that sort of thing. So I went out and did that for several years. Lived in Los Angeles. Did some freelancing with the NFL Network. It was fairly new at the time, and also did some freelancing with ESPN, mostly when they were doing live events, right? So, for example, with the NFL Network, it was when they were doing their Sunday show, pulling clips and writing highlights about the clips, important plays from the games that they should be talking about. From there, what I really found was that that work was rewarding in its own right. Covering the World Series and the Super Bowl and things like that. It was all pretty exciting, but I was very interested in kind of the next level, sort of the deeper level of what we were doing and how we were impacting audiences and how we could make better products. And so at the end of the day, and I'd always kind of in the back of my mind thought that I maybe wanted to be a professor. So I decided to go back to school, and, being a sports guy, sports media guy, one of the first places you think of is the Newhouse School at Syracuse. And so I went there where I had some really great mentors, and it was a really, really positive experience from day one. And what was interesting was, I knew I wanted to be a professor, so I was on a track where it wasn't so much about, okay, how do you be a reporter? How do you do this or do that? It was more about research and asking those deeper level questions that I was interested in. And on one of the first days, we were asked to come up with a research question, and I didn't even know what a research question was. And I came up with one kind of on the fly. You watch the people going around the room, and I'm like, oh God, what am I going to say? And it finally got to me, and I've always been an avid gamer, always, for as long as I can remember. And there was something I had always been wondering about in terms of video games. It was in the infancy of sort of Xbox Live and online gaming becoming more mainstream, I would say. And I had a lot of questions about that and how people were interacting and how the community could be improved. What were the strengths of the community? What were the weaknesses of the community? And I pitched that as a research question, and it received some really positive responses from instructors, and that kind of set me on my path. And that was before esports had really entered the sort of common parlance of our society, right? Now it's kind of a commonly used term, and people really didn't use it as much back then. And so as my work has evolved, that has become a very natural outlet for me, given my professional background as well as my research interests. And that really followed through into my time at UNC, where I talked, where I continued to sharpen my skills as a researcher and as an academic and a scholar. And then from there, I've been essentially teaching production and sports, and doing the esports thing.
Yeah. Crazy journey, and great thinking on the fly, I guess, right? So how would you say, you talked about sports and ESPN and whatnot, or Fox Sports. So how would you say that has it translated into the esports industry or the esports work that you've done?
Well, I think one thing that experience has given me is a perspective of sports production at the highest level, right? And so if we're making the conceit that esports are a sport and are to be produced as sport, then I think that has given me a lot of perspective in terms of, okay, how do you shoot this? How do you make this exciting? How do you package this for an audience, right? And a lot of my research tends to focus on the end user, right? How does the audience gain an appreciation for the content that you're creating, right? And so a lot of what I teach is sports production stuff. How do you broadcast a sporting event? How do you make a sports talk show? That sort of stuff, right? From a technical perspective, but also from a perspective that is more sort of focused on content, right? And so I think that's given me some interesting ways to think about esports, right? Especially as it's becoming more mainstream and becoming something that more people are paying attention to and funneling more money into to raise that production level. Will it ever receive the production value of the Super Bowl? I mean, maybe, but being able to know what that looks like and what esports looks like and what we can do and what parameters we can work in, I think has been valuable to me.
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect segue into kind of like my next question of the next perspective, right? You're a professor, so it seems like you've been here since the beginning, right? Or since before the beginning. So how do you see like gaming or esports kind of grow in the field of academia? Right? Is it going to grow in the field of academia?
So I think there's two ways to think about that, right? There's one is in terms of scholarship, right? Research, things like that. And it's already starting to really, really grow. There's a lot of work to be done, and that was a big part of why I felt a need for that edited volume that you referenced at the beginning of this conversation. But more and more you see papers getting published about esports. So I think there's a big growth there. As far as coursework, I think it's incumbent upon those of us in higher education to pursue things that are shaping our society, things that are important to our society. And we need to develop an understanding of those things, not only from a purely academic perspective, from a purely, okay, what is this thing, but how can we educate our students about, okay, this becomes part of our media literacy. What is this thing? How do you navigate within it, right? And then on top of that, it's a growth area where, part of our job as educators is to prepare students for the world outside of the academy, right? That can take any number of shapes, and I think to ignore something like esports is a misstep, because it is something that is, one, growing, and two, it's opportunities for our students that they might miss out on otherwise.
Absolutely. I completely agree. So I guess from that same standpoint, like, what are the opportunities that esports provides educators like you, say like a university having an esports program or looking at having an esports program? Is it purely like, oh, we have this high powered technology now, or is it, involvement for the students? Like, what does that look like?
That's a big question, and it's one that I think we're still trying to navigate to a certain extent. But the on its face, it's a resource for students and it's a resource for faculty, right? I can talk until I'm blue in the face about League of Legends. Um, but we all know that experiential learning is super important. If a student gets to sit down and play that game on a high-powered machine, and they see what it's like, and they say, "Oh, I see what this is all about," and they can kind of test. They can see what they like about it, see what they don't like about it. Right? That's a lot different than me lecturing them. And so I'm a big advocate of that, and I think that's super important to make sure that that I do in my classes. And so that's one thing that that's sort of at the most basic level. And then from there, I think there's opportunity to grow programs. There's opportunity to grow, to introduce new classes. There's also opportunities for data collection, for research projects. When you have a facility on campus, and you have a hungry population of students like I think we have at Butler.
Yeah, this may have been answered in your previous answer, but maybe there's some expanding to do upon it. Kind of like looking at the investment from a university side, right? How does a university investing in something like this, how are they going to benefit maybe short term? And maybe this is what you just answered, but what does the long term kind of look like, right? Is it making sure you're there when everything takes off, or has it already taken off? Does that make sense?
I think so. And far be it from me to discuss university financials. That sort of thing is above my pay grade, so to speak. Um, but I think it's the sort of thing that there, in my view, gamers are an underserved population. Okay, they're generally treated as outsiders, and their hobbies, or passions or career ambitions are generally treated as, you know something less than, if as opposed to being on the football team or the basketball team, or something like that. And so I think there's a large group of students, both uh, potential students who may come to a place like Butler, and students who already exist at Butler, who would be provided with an opportunity to be part of a community, part of a group, part of a positive social environment where they can pursue their interests and not feel as if they are sort of outsiders anymore, right? And I think that's, I don't want to sound like I'm bashing gamers, but there are negative stereotypes associated with gamers, and I think this is a really important way and viable way to dispel some of those stereotypes, not only within our own community, but also sort of more broadly, right? If more and more people are doing these things, then I think we're going to reduce that stigmatization and help funnel it towards the mainstream. But I guess to circle back to your point, the investment. So that's sort of a social benefit. But I think if you unpack that a little bit more, then what you're looking at is retention of students and recruitment of students. And if a university's business model is focused heavily on student enrollment, then I think that's pretty critical.
Yeah. And this may be up in the air kind of answer as well. Your research and the time you spent looking into all this stuff. Have you found connections between, esports programs, players, this, that, the next, and skills like academic success or social ability, critical thinking, problem solving, stuff like that? Has that kind of been where your research has lied, or?
Well, I am a media effects scholar, which essentially means I look at how media impacts people. But within that, I really focus on video games and more recently esports, because that's an area that I think needs attention. But the it would be intellectually dishonest to say that playing video games is wholly positive, right? The flip side of that coin is also intellectually dishonest, that playing video games is universally negative, right? It's one of those things where it has positive aspects and it might have negative aspects, right? So it's a question of balance, right? It's a question of moderation. It's a question of impulse control, and how the technology is being used, right? But there's a lot of evidence that video games sharpen hand-eye coordination skills. They develop leadership skills, managerial skills. They can be used as effective learning tools. So there's a lot of evidence to show that games, especially team games like a lot of the esports we see, have positive outcomes for the people who play them. And that's not to say that that is completely dismissing any negative effects, right? If someone is practicing Overwatch for 18 hours a day, that's going to have some negative outcomes, right? And so I think it's really important to keep a measured and balanced perspective when talking about these things. And again, I think it's intellectually honest to do so. And so anyone who says games are all bad or games are all good, really, I think is probably trying to paint an inaccurate picture.
Absolutely. So the big subject of our time in these past few months, COVID-19. So how do you think it has kind of affected esports, whether that be in higher education, professional competition, casual, all those things, kind of drawing in that academic, that previous work with sports media. How do you think how do you think it's changed? What has the virus molded it?
Well, that's a really good question, and in a lot of ways, I think it's to be determined. Right. I can speculate, and there are certain things that have happened to this point that I think we can point to. Right. When the pandemic first started, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, now it's time for esports to shine because people don't have to be together." Right. But what I think that ignores um, is the fact that esports was trying to model itself after sports. And that includes big events, right? Playing in person. If you take a look at, the Overwatch League or the crowds that they get at League of Legends matches, they treat it like a major sporting event. Players are playing next to each other. There are big crowds. And so in some ways, I feel like that perspective sort of came back to bite esports, where instead of embracing what makes esports different than traditional sports, the idea of treating it like a traditional sport kind of hindered what happened. I mean, I know in the Overwatch League they ended up postponing a handful of matches and things like that, but that said, it's a lot more flexible. And so there's more opportunity for people to play than, football, right? Where you're putting 22 people out on a field and having them crash into each other and having something high contact like that. I also think it's an opportunity for people to sort of sharpen their skills, right? If I can't go out and do the things that I would normally do, then maybe I can spend that time, I really wanted to try and get better with this character in this game. Then it's an opportunity to do that. So I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in that way, but really, at the end of the day, I think esports are positioned to seize on the moment. And you hate to think of it in an opportunistic way, but I think people are really, really hungry for sports content right now. And if esports can be marketed and produced in a way that's going to attract new audiences and uh, you know create content that is engaging, I think it's a real opportunity for esports to grow.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's great perspective. So, getting into all this, like I said before, it seems you jumped into it probably pre the whole esports era. Was there anybody around you that gave you advice about studying this stuff, being involved with it whatsoever, esports specifically?
Um, to be honest with you, I wouldn't say anyone gave me advice directly. It was kind of reading the tea leaves. It was kind of so if you look at the trajectory of video games, right, when they were invented to now, and how they've grown and how they've developed, right? You start off with like arcade games and things like that, and then you move to home consoles and so on and so forth. Then you move to online gaming, and esports, I think, is a very natural evolution of the trajectory of the video game industry. And so for me, it was very natural to move in this direction, right? It wasn't like, hey, you got to get on the esports thing because it's growing. I think if you're engaged in the literature and you're engaged in the community, then it you could kind of tell which way the wind was blowing. Um, but I have to be honest, some of the best ideas that I get and some of the greatest inspiration that I get are from my students. You know, they're much more tapped in than I am. You know, I'm you know, when I was an undergrad, esports was not a thing, right? And uh, now this has been a part of my students' lives for a lot of their teenage years, their college years, and so they're really embedded in it. And so I love talking to them about it. They're really experts on it, and so I love picking their brains, seeing what they're thinking, and hey, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about that idea? And they'll kind of tell me if that game's kind of not really in vogue anymore. You should really pay attention to this, or hey, what's going on with this player? And they'll kind of give me the scoop. So they're an unbelievable resource, and they're so passionate, and I can't give enough credit to them. And that's one thing that I really want to make as clear as I can. They like what in my view, uh, Butler Esports would not be what it is without um, students who are truly driven and smart and energetic, and just they want to make something that is special and that is long lasting. And I was astounded when I started with it. When I started at Butler, I wanted to start an esports team, and I happened to meet John George, who I'm not sure if you've met or spoken with, but he and I had a conversation, and he really wanted to start an esports team, and he was a senior. And so he went into it knowing that he was going to work hard to build something that he really wasn't going to see the fruits of his labor. And I really respect that about him. And he's a great guy. And I'm wrapping him here. He works for them now. So I think that he really, to me, represents that student spirit that has made this engine go. And I try to tap into that when I can, because I find it so energizing and inspiring.
Absolutely, I could not agree more. The students teach me every day, and their energy, it astounds me. Even though I'm not much older than them, I'm always wondering where that kind of energy went for me. So I know we kind of talked about long term earlier, but the entirety of the esports industry, right? Or maybe not the entirety, whichever piece you want to touch on. Where do you see it being the next 3 to 5 years, right? We talked about, you hate to say seizing the moment, but the changes that come from here, what do we look like in the future in your speculative opinion?
So in my view, there's no reason to see it slowing down. Um, when I was growing up, not everyone played video games. Now, everyone plays video games. Even if you don't consider yourself a gamer, you play video games, right? Whether it's on your phone or whatever. Um, so we're now in a time when it's not that far of a jump. If I talk to my parents about video games, that wasn't part of their world. And I'm not trying to be ageist or anything like that, but simply um, pragmatic in terms of what their world was, right? Like they get movies, they grow up with movies, but video games they didn't really grow up with. And now um, we're at a point where video games aren't going away, and so there are people who are going to want to be part of this and want this to be part of their experience at a college level, at a high school level, at a professional level. And so I don't see it slowing down. But at the on the other hand, the product has to be of high quality, right? If there are bad games or if the community's toxic, then that's gonna hinder the growth.
Yeah. So, you said you weren't given any specific advice when you were getting into it, but there are students, people, whoever watching that are interested in getting into, careers, research, all that kind of stuff around esports. Kind of, do you have advice for them, and is your advice different, when it pertains to specifically esports?
I mean, I think it's the sort of advice I would give to anyone who's aspiring to be a part of something. Do it, right? Go out and do it. There is no reason why, with the technology we have available nowadays, if I want to be someone who works in esports, then start your own podcast, start your own sort of highlight show, right? If you want to play esports, practice, right? Play the games. They're pretty accessible. There are accessibility issues, I think, inherent to sort of internet infrastructure and things like that in rural communities and so on and so forth. But that notwithstanding, you don't need someone like me to force you to do something in class, right? You don't need a boss to force you to do something. If you want to do this, go do it. We're now in a time where you can go out and build a portfolio of your work without the help of, well, I shouldn't say the help, because that's what we're here to do as professors. We're here to help, and I'm more than happy to help. But I might tell you to do something that is specific to a class, whereas your interest might be more specific and more directed, and so do that. Spend your time doing that, and that's going to attract attention of future employers, and people who are hiring in this area. They're going to see that you are so self-motivated and that you know a lot about it, and you don't have to be kind of pushed to do quality work.
So our final question, let me ask everybody coming on, who we love these perspectives that everyone gives us. Who are two other people in the industry, adjacent to the industry, that would be great candidates to have on this interview that have given us unique perspectives like yourself? Do you have anyone?
Well, the premise that I am giving great perspective, I might take issue with, but I would. So, as an academic, I would kind of lean that direction, because I think you're probably getting some other perspectives that are guiding you. But there are people who are writing about this, who are writing about esports and doing some really interesting work on this front. Andy Billings is someone I would suggest talking to. He's a very well-respected sports communications scholar down at Alabama. And he actually works with a handful of people down there. Keenan Brown is another one. And he's done some interesting stuff in this area. So I would consider reaching out to them. And I could provide you with some other people who I think have done some interesting stuff in the area. Dave Headland at St. John's. He would be someone who would be worthwhile talking to, and I feel badly because I'm sure I'm forgetting some really good people to talk to, and I hate to do that, but yeah, it's like I'm giving the thank you speech at the Oscars,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
So that was our last question. Great interview. Thank you so much for being a part of this week's session. Want to like I said, we want to thank you, Dr. Rogers, being here, spending your time with us. Stay safe, stay well, go dogs.
You bet. Thank you very much.